and he felt the chill of the cold bite his back, but let himself be encompassed by the warmth around him. Then he realized it is night, and he should probably frickin' find out where these enemies are going to be coming from. Hello everybody, my name is JD the Battleman, and welcome back to Kingdom New Lands. Now today I'm going to tell a little story of a king and his kingdom, and how he's forgotten mostly how to play this game, and what he's going to do to overcome that disability. On the 21st day of this king's rule over his mightily growing kingdom, he realized with a bit of a bleak outlook that he knew with winter on the horizon, he and his people would not be able to survive much longer. And so, with determination in his heart, he set out. He set out on a journey to complete something that he'd begun long ago. Like a week earlier, but nonetheless felt like a long time because it had been weeks since we had last seen his progress. Months, even. So, even though it felt only like a month or two, or however long it actually was, it was only just a few days since he had begun working on this project. And he was going to invest everything he had in this project, not knowing if there was something else he should be doing instead that was a better use of his money and time. As he felt the chill of winter rise up his back, his steed, bristling with cold, began to return to their home, his torch burning warmly, because he didn't know what a torch was. And he rode back into his kingdom to lead over his people, somewhat somber, knowing that his wallet was empty and his ability to provide for his people and his kingdom was restricted at best. Not being able to remember which direction his soldiers had been fighting the weeks before, he gingerly observed the walls around him in an effort to determine the source, the direction of the problems that had plagued his kingdom for many, many weeks and months. As he approached his castle home, he saw his people gathering there, all of the farmers and all the workers, and a few of his soldiers, and a couple guys who were just absolutely wasting their time not doing anything. And he felt the chill of the cold bite his back, but let himself be encompassed by the warmth around him. Then he realized it is night, and he should probably frickin' find out where these enemies are going to be coming from. Oh no! And with this assault on his fortress walls... Oh, that was awesome. Well, that didn't last long. With this assault on his fortress walls, he realized that the brave workers he had sent out the day before would probably no longer be around to return to their work on the ship. The builders eagerly reconstructed their walls. In the silence, he felt a bit of mourning for these lost souls, not knowing where they were or what their fate had become. But with the determination only a king could have, he rode out into the cold and into the dangers, with the hope of finding those that had been lost. It's a beautiful environment. As the king made his way towards the last known location of his fellow soldiers, of his fellow builders, of his fellow kingdom mates, he found a few ragged and torn people and he delivered unto them a means of safety, warmth, and satiation of their hunger. With an empty wallet and a heavy heart, he returned back to his home, passing only briefly those that he had spoken to before to say hi, knowing and appreciating the value of his steed and the power that it gave him to help those around him. He rode off into the silent, blisteringly cold, snowy front until he approached his walls, and his fire warmed his heart. The fire laid low, not much to show for it, but the crops lay dying outside the castle walls, and he was not sure how to react. He was not sure what to think. His men were hungry, and his men were in dire need of resources to build and sustain themselves. And while they had but a few soldiers to keep their walls defended, their farmers' lands were barren, and the cold did not recede. And as night came closer and closer, and what little sunlight was left dwindled away, the moon rose through the clouds beyond his line of sight to illuminate the path for those that might wish to harm those in his kingdom under his rule. He would have built up his defenses, and he would have done what he could to protect his fellow men, but had no means to do so, and wasn't sure what the crap he was going to do, to be completely honest. Now, if it wasn't obvious already, I'm only telling the story from I heard it from somebody else, so I'm not really sure what is the truth. It's like a game of telephone. It always gets distorted a little bit, but where was I? Ah, that's right. The king rode into his castle and approached his people and said, "We must stay strong. But more than that, we must leave. We must leave, for this place we are in is a famine. It is a curse upon our people, and in order for us to thrive and to live, we must leave this wretched place. We must find a new land to call home." And so, he went back to the ship from before. And his only goal in mind was to survive and to take his place, his kingdom, to new lands. Totally coincidence that that's the title, by the way, just completely irrelevant. But as he rode back towards his castle and his home, he went to check and see if they had received orders, if they had had the intuition to come and build their ship. And they did. And as the sun came out, it warmed his heart, and oddly enough it warmed his toes, which had until that point been exceedingly cold. Again observing the speed difference between him and his people as they rushed to the ship, and he trotted along on his horse. He appreciated this mobility blessed upon him by some deity of fate, and watched with solemnity, standing guard in case the monsters arose, although he had no way to stop them if they did, and watched as the men did their best and built their ship, and succinctly found themselves out of materials. And so he rushed back to his kingdom, watching the moon fall through the sky and the sun set behind the stony outcroppings far off in the distance behind him. He watched as his armored troop of knights and soldiers stood outside their gate, standing vigilant and strong against the opposing forces of their kingdom. He watched as the farmers ran around with despair and helplessness in their eyes as their crops died one after the other, till there was nothing left, no harvest, and the king knew with utmost certainty, without a doubt, that he had little time. The beasts that assaulted his walls would only return, and they would do so with haste. He watched the moon fall through the night sky, and wondered if perchance there had been a kingdom before his that had somehow made its way to the safety that the moon had to offer. As he saw the enemy approach his walls, and his heart skipped, almost jumping out of his chest. He retreated behind the wall and encouraged his men to stand strong against the oncoming horde of beasts that sought nothing more than to destroy everything he had built alongside his people. But alas, the wall stood strong. The engineers manning the ballistics fought bravely, taking 2 shots and destroying many. The king, in an attempt to preserve his resources enough for the day after, gave all of his money to help those in need, to provide a bit of charity and encourage his men to work inside the castle, those that wove textiles, those that sealed and served the preservatives, the jams and jellies, those that baked their flour into bread using the heated ovens in the castle. And there was not much that he had left, but he knew he had to have faith in his people, that they could bond and unite, and that they could use these objects with the little bit of funding that he had provided, and be able to provide so much more than he had been able to do on his own. As he watched over his people, who despite the struggles appeared happy that they were there with one another, and that they had the good things that they did. He watched with pride in his heart that his people were so strong as they were. Slightly incompetent, but nonetheless strong, resilient to the forces that would destroy what they had built. He waited out the long day, and as the long day came to a close, he braced himself and wrapped his clothes tighter for the even longer night. He looked up at the archers in the tower above his head, saw as they stood strong, ever vigilant, that no enemy's attempts to invade, pillage, plunder, and destroy would come to fruition. He watched as the rest of his soldiers that had otherwise been standing outside the wall braced themselves for the dangers of the night and retreated inward. He saw as the engineers prepared the heavy artillery if it had been needed. He watched the wall and waited. waited with dread in his heart, juxtaposed only by his willingness to survive. His sanity was being strung out to a bare minimum, unentangled, hanging by a single thread. He waited and waited, and was almost reassured by the approach of the beasts, keeping at bay the slight fears that his men could not hold the line. But alas, they did, and he was not sure how. He took what little money that his steward had provided him, wondering if it had been worth the wasted day, if he could have done more the day before. But he took what little he had, and he rode outward. He dropped a coin next to the water's edge and stared at its reflection before picking up and resuming where he had left off. His soul... the heck? His soul was torn as he had to walk past those in need, and he could not offer. The king trusted that his men would come and successfully build the thing that they had been commanded to. With grim demeanor, the king offered one of them a place of reprieve, as the other stared in hopeless despair. He rode back to his kingdom, his heart heavy with the choices that he had had to make. His horse exhausted, all in short supply of food between man and beast. They made do with what they could. That was part of the strength of it all. The king had had a few coins given to him by a fair builder. He desired to send his soldiers on their path to destroy the portal that the beasts arrived through. So he requested, rather, that an archer be trained and equipped with the proper armaments, and to join the troop that waited outside the walls, that they might fight the oncoming doom that approached them. All the men and their king, as they stood outside the wall, retreated inward with fear in their hearts of some unknown presence. If they had felt dread before, it compared nothing to what they felt now. Colors were seeped out of the air. The sky leached of its rich color to give way to blood. Light tainted by the dead and the damned. Oh, their hearts dropped. The wall battered, survived hit after hit. The thudding outside their wall as the walls began to collapse. The men retreated inward. The wall lay in shambles, the king lay penniless. But they had survived. They had survived the onslaught of an evil that they had not yet seen. And with hope in their hearts, they approached the next 5 days with grim solemnity as they prepared for the dangers that they might offer. And nearly as poor as the dirt upon which he stood, the king would set out another time to resume his duties to protect his people. But alas, they would be at another time. And with that, everyone, I must sincerely thank you for your time, and I hope you understand the severity that this kingdom lies almost in ruins. And I hope you appreciate the struggle that they go through, the thoughts and hopes of each person and care that they all have. And I say these things in the hope that you take them to heart. And with that, until next time, unfortunately, the king's story must be held in suspense. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. I hope you felt the difficulties weigh heavy on your heart. I know I did. But until next time, this is the king and his kingdom, and their wonderful story told by some guy who I'm sure you are slightly familiar with. Signing off.